I only needed shelter. But this broken workshop already knew my family's name.
She was 20 and homeless. No diploma. No room. No family willing to answer. Just a canvas satchel and $8 she had earned shelving books after midnight. And with that $8, she bought a condemned ship in a bottle builder's loft on Nantucket Island, Massachusetts. Erased from county maps in 1968, the north roof sagged above the workbench. Black mold had climbed halfway up the stairwell. Nantucket County had closed it on October 3rd, 2024, with demolition planned for spring. Inside a narrow drawer built beneath the loft bench, unopened for 56 years, lay a velvet-lined tweezers box, holding what would alter her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Vera Vale had been fitting large hopes through narrow openings her whole life without knowing it. She grew up in a rented apartment above a laundromat in New Bedford, where the walls trembled during the spin cycle and salt gathered white on the window latches. She learned to finish homework beside humming dryers, to mend hems with borrowed thread, and to keep every pencil until it was too short to sharpen. At 12, she could tell by her mother's footsteps whether the rent had been paid. Marianne Vale worked breakfast shifts at a nursing home and slept in her uniform between them. She loved Vera in practical portions, bus fare folded under a cereal bowl, oranges bought one at a time, a hand pressed briefly to a fevered forehead. Yet fear had trained her to protect whatever remained, even when protection looked like turning away. On Saturdays, Vera walked to the harbour and sat beside Elias Vale, her grandfather's older brother, a former merchant seaman whose left leg ended below the knee. He wore a navy watch cap in every season and kept a cedar case beneath his bench. From it came a penknife, linen thread, beeswax, long-reach tweezers, and hull blanks no longer than her thumb. He taught her to carve with the grain drill mast holes before thinning the deck, and hinge each mast with a loop of thread so the whole rig could lie flat against the hull. They practiced in discarded medicine bottles. Vera guided the folded ship through the neck while Elias steadied her wrist. Then she pulled the rigging lines one by one until the masts rose inside the glass. Afterward they shared coffee cake from waxed paper and watched ferries cross the grey water. Never blame the bottle for having a narrow neck, Elias told her. Build carefully enough, and the ship will still stand. Vera understood that he meant wood, patience, and nearly everything else. He died during her first semester at college after a winter infection reached his lungs. By the time Vera returned, his rented room had been cleared. The cedar case, his brass dividers, the cobalt bottles, and the notebook of star bearings had gone to an estate reseller whose name no one remembered. All she kept was a bent sail needle found beneath his harbour bench. At college, Vera's roommate, Celia Brent, arranged her desk with the severe neatness of a display window. She labelled food, timed showers, corrected other people's grammar, and watched Vera's scholarship letters with a stillness that felt more attentive than friendship. During midterms, Celia stole a sealed examination from a teaching assistant's cart, photographed it, and placed the paper beneath Vera's mattress. When the dean questioned them, Celia cried without smudging her mascara. Vera spoke plainly and was treated as rehearsed. The disciplinary board met on November 14, 2024. By dusk, Vera's campus card no longer opened the residence hall. A housing officer set her canvas satchel on the wet pavement, its brass buckle striking the curb. Celia stood behind the glass doors with both arms folded. Vera called her mother and held the phone close enough to hear a TV playing in the nursing home break room. The officer said, "Take your bag and leave before security arrives." 8 words. On the line, Marianne breathed once slowly, then ended the call without speaking. For 6 weeks, Vera moved south and east according to warmth, library hours, and the price of a bus seat. She slept 2 nights beneath the awning of a closed pharmacy in Providence where delivery trucks woke her before dawn. In Fall River, she paid $22 for a hostel bunk and left when the room began to cost more than food. Boston took the rest quickly. $9 for a locker, $6 for soup and bread, $3 for a laundromat dryer she sat beside until midnight. She learned which South Station benches had armrests and which security guards looked away. By Christmas week she had $17. After a bus to Hyannis, a cup of coffee and a packet of crackers, she had 11. She spent 3 on a library photocopy card because paper, unlike memory, could not be confiscated. The Hyannis Public Library was warm enough that her hands stopped shaking. On December 27th, she searched county auctions, abandoned workshops, and tax title sales, not because she expected a home, but because indoor listings let her remain at the computer. Near closing time, a scanned notice appeared beneath a photograph of a leaning shingled building. Maritime Craft Loft, Nantucket. Structure sold as is, removal or repair reported, minimum bid $8. A librarian with silver glasses showed her the ferry schedule and circled the county clerk's address. Vera printed the notice, folded it around her remaining bills, and touched the sail needle hidden in the satchel seam. The last ferry would leave before sunset the next day. By morning, the $8 were no longer emergency money. They were a bid. She boarded for Nantucket, carrying everything she owned toward a building everyone else had already abandoned. The ferry left Hyannis under a low ceiling of clouds, carrying Vera east through water, the color of worn pewter. She stayed outside until the wind forced tears from her eyes, then sheltered beside a stack of freight crates on the lower deck. Nantucket appeared slowly, first as a grey line, then as church steeples and cedar roofs gathered close against the sea. She stepped onto Strait Wharf shortly after 3 with 53 cents, the auction notice, and no money for lodging. The county office would not open until morning. She walked 4 miles toward the center of the island, keeping the harbor at her back, until the streets narrowed and the lamps grew farther apart. Beyond the last year-round houses, she found a hay barn with one door hanging loose from its lower hinge. The owner had stacked square bales along 3 walls, leaving a dry channel between them. Vera climbed behind the second row, spread her coat over the straw, and slept in intervals while the temperature fell to 27 degrees. Mice moved beneath the floorboards. Each time the wind struck the tin roof, she woke with one hand around the sail needle in her pocket. At dawn, frost silvered the weeds beside Milestone Road. She brushed hay from her hair and walked back toward town before anyone came to feed the animals. Nantucket was opening one door at a time. Murray's Toggery raised its striped awning. The Nantucket pharmacy switched on a green lamp above the register. Steam clouded the windows of the Downy Flake. At Marine Home Center, a forklift carried lumber across the yard. Farther along Main Street, Mitchell's Book Corner displayed tide tables, local histories, and a faded volume about whaling voyages. Vera noted each place as Elias had taught her to note stars, not because she needed them yet, but because she might need to find her way back. The Nantucket County Clerk's office occupied the first floor of a brick building whose radiators clicked like cooling engines. Vera arrived 7 minutes before opening and waited beneath a framed map of the island. When the inner door unlocked, a woman with one white eyebrow and one brown eyebrow looked at Vera's satchel, damp shoes, and folded auction notice without appearing surprised. Her brass nameplate read MRS. Dorothea Pike. Assistant Clerk. You are here about the loft. Yes. Ma'am. Mrs.? Pike sat behind a walnut desk rubbed pale along its front edge. She opened a file tied with cotton tape and laid out 4 sheets, aligning their corners with one square fingertip. You understand the property has no electrical service? Yes. Ma'am, you understand the well has not been certified? Yes. Ma'am? You understand the structure is under a demolition order? Yes. Ma'am, you understand the county will not reimburse repairs, injuries, materials, ferry costs, any other loss you suffer after accepting title? Yes. Ma'am. Mrs. Pike removed her glasses. A faint groove remained across the bridge of her nose. And you have inspected it? No. Ma'am? For the first time, the clerk's hands stopped moving. The radiator knocked twice. Somewhere beyond the wall, a stamp came down with a heavy wooden thud. Mrs. Pike studied Vera for several seconds. then looked at the 8 $1 bills placed beside the notice. They were softened from use and folded into quarters. One bore a blue laundry mark from New Bedford. The county normally discourages this sort of decision. I understand. That was not one of my warnings. No, ma'am. A corner of Mrs. Pike's mouth tightened, though not quite into a smile. She turned the deed toward Vera and indicated 3 lines with the capped end of her pen. Vera signed her full name, dated the transfer December 29th, 224, and pressed hard enough for the letters to mark the sheet beneath. Mrs. Pike counted the bills twice. She fed the deed into a brass embosser whose handle was shaped like a ship's cleat, then brought it down with both hands. The county seal rose from the paper in a perfect circle. Take Orange Street south, she said. Turn onto Prospect. Continue past the cemetery, then follow Milk Street until it bends west. You will see an unmarked shell lane after the second stone wall. The loft stands behind the walnut trees. She slid the deed across the desk, but did not release it. Vale, she said. Vera waited. Was Elias Vale related to you? The room seemed to become smaller around the name. He was my great-uncle. Mrs. Pike let go of the deed. She opened the file again, searched beneath an inspection report, and withdrew a yellow ownership card. The handwriting on it leaned forward in narrow, disciplined strokes. Elias came here every October for 17 years. He never owned the building, but Silas Rook let him use the upper workbench whenever the summer tenants had gone. They built miniatures together. Vera touched the edge of the desk. He never told me. Perhaps he believed there would be time. Mrs. Pike turned the card around. Beside Elias's name was a list of dates, bottle dimensions, and payments made in small amounts. The final entry was October 12th, 1998. Tool chest removed to storeroom. It read, Personal box Loft by request. Where is the storage? The company dissolved 20 years ago. Their warehouse became condominiums. And the personal box. Mrs. Pike glanced toward the rain-dark window. No inspector recorded finding one. She placed the ownership card back into the file and retied the cotton tape. Then she selected one of Vera's dollar bills, the one with the blue laundry mark, and put it inside the shallow drawer beneath her stamp pad. The account has to balance, she said. I will enter the full payment. Vera did not ask why the bill stayed behind. Outside, sleet had begun to tick against the courthouse steps. She followed the clerk's direction south, passing houses whose grey shingles had weathered almost silver. Beyond Prospect Hill Cemetery, the pavement shone black beneath bare elms. A man mending a picket fence watched her pass without greeting. His red setter followed Vera for half a mile, stopping whenever she stopped and finally turning home when she reached the second stone wall. The shell lane was nearly hidden beneath dead beach grass. Crushed shells shifted under her soles with a sound like thin porcelain breaking. 4 walnut trees stood at its end, their trunks dark from rain and their branches spread above a narrow 2-story building. The loft measured perhaps 18 feet across and 32 feet deep. Cedar shingles covered the walls. Though the north side had lost enough to expose grey sheathing, the roof dipped above the rear room. A brick chimney rose crookedly through a patch of tar paper, and one iron gutter hung by a single strap. Over the door a salt-bleached board carried the faint outline of painted words, Rook, Maritime Miniatures. The county notice had been nailed through the centre. Vera pulled it free, folded it once, and placed it in her satchel. The key resisted until she lifted the door by its handle. When the lock turned, the bottom edge scraped across the floor, pushing a crescent of black dust ahead of it. Air emerged from the building cold and mineral, touched with cedar rot, old glue, and the faint briny odour of glass washed long ago in seawater. The front room held a cast-iron stove, 2 ladder-back chairs, and a counter with shallow drawers. Rain tapped the windows. Beneath it, Vera heard the building's smaller sounds, thread brushing wood, a loose pane ticking in its frame, something dry shifting inside the wall. She ran one finger across the counter. The dust had the soft thickness of flour. Under it lay rings left by bottles of different widths, hundreds of pale circles overlapping one another. The back room was lower and darker. Shelves climbed from floor to ceiling, crowded with empty apothecary bottles, square gin bottles and long-necked vessels clouded by age. Several contained unfinished hulls lying on their sides. Tiny masts had collapsed into tangles of brown linen. On the workbench, a row of long steel tweezers rested in a wooden rack, their tips stained with wax and dried adhesive. Vera lifted one. The metal was so cold it hurt her fingers. Above the bench, a steep stair led to the sleeping loft. The fourth tread bowed under her weight. The upper room contained a rope cot with no canvas, a wool blanket stiff with damp, and a window looking west across marsh grass toward a strip of winter water. When Vera wiped the glass with her sleeve, the last light appeared beneath the clouds, narrow and copper-coloured. She returned downstairs before dark. The stove smelled of wet ash, and she did not risk lighting it. Instead, she ate the final crackers from her satchel, drank from the library fountain bottle she had carried across the Sound, and made a bed from the least damp section of blanket. The floor pressed hard against her hip. Cold moved beneath the door and settled around her shoulders. Yet the building had walls, a lock, and a deed bearing her name. Sometime after midnight, wind crossed the chimney and produced a low note, almost like breath passing over the mouth of a bottle. Vera opened her eyes. From the rear workroom came a single wooden click, then silence. Even inside the narrowest space, you can still build a ship pointed toward the open sea. As morning entered through the west window as a pale rectangle on the floor, Vera rose before the cold had left her hands and followed the shell lane to the well behind the walnut trees. Its iron pump handle moved, but the first strokes brought only a hollow cough. On the 37th pull, brown water spilled across the stone basin. She let it run until it cleared, boiled a jarful over a candle stub, and marked the handle with a strip torn from the auction notice. The outhouse leaned toward the marsh and had no door latch. She repaired it with copper wire found beneath the counter. By the third day she knew which floorboards announced her weight and which could be crossed silently. The click she had heard during the night did not return, though one plank beside the rear workbench sounded deeper than the others when she tapped it with her heel. Food became the first problem. Heat came second. She walked back to town carrying measurements written on the margin of the deed. Marine Home Centre smelled of pine boards, kerosene, rope and damp wool. Behind the counter stood a broad man whose left ear had been folded flat by an old injury. His name, stitched onto his canvas apron, was Henry Coffin. He examined Vera's list, then examined Vera. "You own the Rook Loft. The county says I do. County says many things from warm rooms." He lifted the paper toward the light. Vera had listed stove cement, chimney brushes, lamp oil, nails, a bucket, and enough food to last 4 days. Henry crossed out the lamp oil. "You need the flue open before flame. I have 53 cents. That presents a separate difficulty." He opened a green account ledger and wrote her name at the top of a fresh page. "No interest for 30 days, he said. "After that, we discuss labor. I can work. I expect you can." The prices appeared in his square handwriting: a 6-inch chimney brush, $8.75, 2 extension rods, $5.40, stove cement, $3.25, a galvanized bucket, $4.60, 3 pounds of cut nails, $6.15 set, and a used enamel cooking pot, $2.50. He placed a thin book on top of the supplies without entering it in the ledger. The cover read "Repairs for the owner of an old house." "My father bought those by the case," Henry said. Most people preferred paying him to read. Vera carried the load against her chest, stopping twice before the cemetery to rest the bucket on a stone wall. The chimney took 6 hours. She removed the stovepipe first and stuffed a damp rag into the opening to keep soot from filling the room. On the roof, she tied the brush to both extension rods, lowered it through the chimney pot, and worked it in short vertical strokes rather than twisting, as the manual instructed. The first passage released only grey dust. The second struck something dense 8 feet down. Vera pushed harder. A slab of creosote broke loose and fell with a sound like crockery shattering. More followed, glossy black flakes, bird grass, 2 walnut shells, and a dead starling preserved almost weightless by soot. She climbed down, cleared the firebox, then returned to the roof. By the 5th hour, the brush passed from pot to damper without catching. Her sleeves were black to the elbows. Soot had settled into the lines around her fingernails and beneath the edge of her scarf. She sealed 2 gaps in the stove collar with cement, waited the recommended hour, then held a twist of burning paper beneath the open damper. The smoke rose. She fed in cedar splinters, then 2 pieces of dry walnut gathered beneath the trees. The stove clicked as it warmed. Rust darkened. A smell of hot iron replaced the damp odour that had occupied the room for years. Vera filled the enamel pot with well water, added a potato, half an onion, and a handful of oats Henry had tucked into the bucket. The meal thickened without becoming soup or porridge. She ate it from the pot while sitting on the floor, holding each spoonful near her face for the steam. That evening, she began the workroom inventory. She chose only objects that might be repaired or understood: a palm-sized hull of yellowed balsa, a brass pin vise fitted with a drill no thicker than hair, 3 spools of waxed linen thread, a cloudy square bottle with a collapsed schooner inside, a cork press made from maple, a narrow glue spoon darkened by heat, a hand-drawn rigging plan weighted beneath a whale vertebra, and the long wooden box that held the tweezers. The box was 30 inches in length and built from cedar, its lid secured by 2 brass hooks. Inside, 12 steel tools rested in fitted channels lined with faded green velvet. Some ended in straight points, others curved like heron's bills. Elias had owned a similar set, though his case had been smaller, and patched at one corner with sailcloth. Vera lifted each instrument, wiped it with an oiled rag, and returned it to its groove. The final pair would not come free. She pulled gently, assuming rust had caught beneath the handle. The tool rose half an inch and stopped. When she pressed the velvet beside it, something answered with a dry wooden knock. Vera removed the other tweezers again. She tapped the bottom with the handle of the glue spoon. Most of the box gave a thin, hollow sound. Beneath the last 2 channels, the note became shorter. She weighed the case in her hands. The cedar lid and tools could not account for its heaviness. The velvet had been glued along 3 sides, but stitched at the 4th with green thread. Vera warmed the point of the bent sail needle over the stove, cleaned it, and worked it beneath the first stitch. 1 loop parted. Then another. Under the lining lay a cedar disc no wider than a quarter, fitted into a shallow recess. She pressed it. A narrow panel rose at the opposite end of the box. Vera did not open it immediately. She set the case on the bench, washed her hands, and added 1 piece of walnut to the stove. The room had grown dark enough that the window reflected her face among the bottles. Then she lifted the panel. The compartment contained 3 packages and a tin box. Each had been wrapped in sailcloth and tied with waxed line. The smallest bore 1 word in Elias's handwriting. Vera. She sat down. The first package held tools, his brass dividers, the bone-handled knife he had taught her to sharpen, 2 miniature clamps, and a long needle with a flattened eye for guiding rigging through a bottle neck. Their steel carried small rust blooms, but the edges had been greased before wrapping. Inside the second was a roll of linen, several strips of balsa, and a block of close-grained pear wood. A note on the outer fold gave 3 measurements for hulls intended for medicine bottles. The third package held the cobalt-blue bottle. It was scarcely 5 inches long, with a narrow lip and bubbles trapped inside the old glass. Within it stood a 3-masted ship no larger than Vera's little finger. Every yard had been squared. 6 pale sails appeared to hold wind, though the bottle remained still. Beneath the hull, a folded strip of paper showed a hand-drawn star map, its black points connected by threads fine enough to be mistaken for cracks in the glass. Vera placed the bottle against the wall where it could not roll. Only then did she open the tin. Bank straps had yellowed around packets of currency. Beneath them lay envelopes of coins separated by tissue paper and labelled in Elias's hand. Silver, gold, 4 yen, keep. Vera counted everything twice, recording each line on the back page of the repair manual. There were worn Morgan dollars, Barber $half, Indian head gold pieces, and 12 British sovereigns from voyages whose dates ranged across 4 decades. Some coins had holes near their edges where sailors had once worn them on cord. Others were smooth from pockets. At the bottom lay a purple heart engraved with the name Samuel Rook and the year 1944. The currency and coins came to exactly $24,500. Vera counted a third time because an amount that large ought to have changed shape under her hands. It did not. It remained paper, metal, cloth, and weight. The stove continued ticking. Wind pressed softly against the west wall. Beneath the medal was a sealed envelope addressed in the same handwriting as the package. She turned it over but did not break the seal. The Loft had already given her more than she knew how to receive in one day. Vera wrapped the money again, returned it to the compartment, and carried only the cobalt bottle and the letter upstairs. She placed them beside the wall, then went outside without her coat. Night had settled across the marsh. Water moved beyond the grass, black except where a narrow path of moonlight trembled between the island and the open sound. She stood beneath the bare walnuts until her breathing slowed and the cold reached through her shirt. Behind her, one window of the loft glowed amber for the first time in years. Even inside the narrowest space, you can still build a ship pointed toward the open sea. At dawn, Vera carried the cobalt bottle downstairs and set it where the first light could pass through the glass. The star map inside brightened before the ship did. Only then did she lift the envelope. Elias's handwriting leaned toward the right, each letter narrow and evenly spaced, the same hand that had once labelled spools of thread and marked mast lengths on scraps of brown paper. She broke the seal with the bent sail needle. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have opened this box, then the Loft has outlasted both my courage and my excuses. Dr. Miriam Fiske at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston told me on March 6, 2001, that the weakness in my hands was caused by amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. She spoke carefully, and I admired her for that. A man who has spent his life making small things should not object when the truth is given to him in exact measurements. This work began with Josiah Rook, born in 1841 in Nantucket, who learned joinery aboard the whaler Essex Belle and opened this room in 1872. His daughter, Eliza Rook, born here in 1878, kept the shop after his sight failed and taught her son Samuel, born in 1904, to set hinged masts and carve hulls from pearwood. Samuel's younger sister Ruth carried the methods to New Bedford in 1931 and taught them to her son Daniel Vale, my father. Daniel taught me at the kitchen table in 1954, and I began teaching Vera, my brother's granddaughter, beside the harbour in 2012. The trade closed on October 12, 1968. After that came more than 30 years of silence in this room. Samuel Rook was killed in France during the Second World War, near Saint-Lô, in July of 1944. The medal in the tin was returned to his mother with a folded flag and a letter written by a captain who had never seen this island. She placed both beneath the walnut tree and never spoke of them again. You may be tempted to believe that inheritance is a matter of blood. It is not. Blood can carry a name and still refuse the work. Inheritance belongs to the person willing to sharpen the knife. Sweep the bench, Spoil a piece of good wood, and begin again without applause. For the smallest medicine bottles, carve the hull no wider than 3/4 of the neck opening. Steam linen line for 10 minutes before waxing it, or the knots will tighten unevenly. Mix hide glue with water at 1 part glue to 2 parts water and warm it below 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Hotter glue becomes brittle. After the ship is inserted, wait 12 minutes before raising the masts. Pull the forward stay first, then the main, then the mizzen. Never force a mast that has turned against the glass. Lower it, breathe, and begin again. The cobalt bottle contains the North Atlantic stars as my father drew them. Do not break it to retrieve the paper. A map that can only be reached by destroying the vessel is not meant to be held. The money is the part I delayed too long. Some came from my voyages, some from Samuel's estate, and some from work no customer ever collected. Use it to make the house sound. Use little. Keep records. Leave enough that the next pair of hands will not begin with nothing. I had hoped to tell Vera these things myself. I watched her learn without rushing. She could hold a hull with 2 fingers and listen with the rest of her body. Then I became ill, and pride made me quiet. I placed the box here because I believed the loft would remain closed until someone patient enough found it. Perhaps that person is Vera. Perhaps it is a stranger. The work does not require certainty from me now. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You're welcome here. Elias Daniel Vale, October 12th, 2001. Vera read the letter twice. The second time she slowed over the line containing her name, pressing one thumb to the paper as though the letters might lift from it. When she finished, she folded the pages along their original creases, smoothing each edge with the bone handle of Elias's knife. Then she placed the letter beneath the cobalt bottle and sat until the fire needed tending. Behind the loft, the ground fell gently toward the marsh. Vera crossed it with the letter's reference to the walnut tree fixed in her mind. The 4 trees stood apart from one another, but the oldest grew nearest the stone foundation, its trunk divided at shoulder height. Beneath its eastern root, half hidden by moss, she found a rectangular bronze marker no larger than her palm. Rook 1944. No flag remained. No letter. Only the marker, green at its edges, and a shallow seam in the bark above it where some metal plate had once been fitted. Vera cleared dead leaves from the base with both hands. She did not dig. That evening she brought down a brass whale oil lamp from the highest workroom shelf. Its wick had hardened into a black cord, but a spare coil rested inside the base. She trimmed it to 1/4 inch, filled the reservoir with the small bottle of lamp oil Henry had later added to her account, and turned the wheel until the flames settled low and steady. The old glass chimney warmed without cracking. Under that light, the loft seemed less abandoned than paused. She thought of the librarian in Hyannis, whose silver glasses had slipped down her nose while she circled the ferry schedule. She remembered Mrs. Pike keeping $1 in the shallow desk drawer and stamping the deed as paid in full. Henry Coffin had opened credit to a stranger whose shoes were still wet. The farmer whose barn she had entered never knew he had given her one night without wind. None of them had changed her life alone. Together they had made a narrow crossing possible. There may be someone listening who still remembers a kindness too small for anyone else to record, a meal left quietly, a door held open after closing time, a ride offered without questions. What was the small kindness that carried you farther than the giver ever knew? Vera returned the money to the hidden compartment but kept the tools beside her. That night she slept upstairs with Elias's knife, the brass dividers, the sealed tin, and the cobalt ship arranged on the floor within reach of her hand. Outside, the wind moved through the walnut branches. Inside, nothing was lost. The first snow came on December 3rd, 4 inches driven sideways across the marsh until the shell lane disappeared beneath a level white sheet. Vera read the roofing chapter 3 times beside the stove, tracing each diagram with Elias's sail needle. The main roof measured 18 by 32 feet, with a rear pitch shallower than the front. allowing for overlap, waste, and the damaged north edge. She calculated 12 squares of cedar shingles, 4 rolls of 15-pound felt, and 22 pounds of hot-dipped nails. Henry Coffin studied her figures and removed an old roofing hatchet from beneath the counter. Its handle was dark with sweat, and one cheek carried the initials WC. "My brother's," he said. He would object to rust. The former roofer arrived the following morning without being asked. Walter Coffin was 73, narrow as a folded ruler, and missing the tip of his right thumb. When Vera offered payment, she looked toward the sagging ridge. "You can pay me by learning once." They worked 11 days. Walter showed her how to sister a split rafter with a straight length of spruce, clamping the new board against the old before driving pairs of nails every 16 inches. He snapped a chalk line across the felt and taught her the 3-stroke method: set, drive, finish. The hatchet rose only a few inches each time. "That nail's proud." Vera checked the shingle. "Pull it." Wind lifted the felt on the 6th day and tore one corner loose. They climbed down, weighted the remaining rolls with stones, and waited through an afternoon of sleet. On the 9th morning, Vera split 12 shingles by driving nails too close to the edge. Walter placed the ruined pieces in a neat pile and made her reset the line. By December 15th, the final ridge caps lay straight from chimney to eave. Vera stood on the ladder while Walter walked backward across the yard. One eye closed, measuring the roof against the horizon. He tipped his cap. The north wall stayed dry through the next rain. January exposed what the first fire had hidden. Mortar fell from the chimney in pale grains, and several bricks had begun to spoil, their faces peeling away in thin red plates whenever the temperature dropped. Vera removed the loose joints with a narrow plugging chisel, stopping before she reached sound mortar. Henry mixed hydraulic lime and sand at 1 part lime to 2.5 parts sand. Around the flue throat, where heat mattered more, he added fire clay in a ratio of 1 part fire clay to 3 parts prepared mortar. "Wet the brick first," he said. "Dry brick steals the cure." For 3 weeks, temperatures remained in the 20s. Vera worked from a plank scaffold tied to the walnut tree, pressing mortar deep into the joints with a pointing trowel. Every 15 minutes her bare fingers went numb, and she climbed down to warm them around a mug of water heated on the stove. Gloves protected her skin but dulled the pressure needed to finish the joints, so she wore them only while mixing. One morning, a new patch cracked before noon. She had laid it too thick. Vera scraped it out while it was still green, remixed a smaller batch, and rebuilt the joint in 2 passes. On January 28th, she lit a test fire with newspaper, headar, and 1 split of dry oak. Outside, Walter held a mirror above the chimney pot. No smoke leaked through the brickwork. Inside, the draft pulled the flame upright and clean. Vera added another log. The room warmed without smelling of soot. Beneath the black grime, the floors were white pine, wide-planked and fastened with hand-cut rosehead nails. Some boards carried burns from dropped glue pots. Others had crescent marks where bottle crates had been dragged for decades. Vera rented a random orbit sander for $14 a day and carried it from town in Henry's delivery truck. Before starting, she set every proud nail below the surface with a narrow punch, working carefully around the roseheads she wanted to preserve. The first pass, at 80 grit, removed dirt and old wax. The room filled with a dry resin smell that reminded her of Elias sharpening cedar blanks at the harbour. She vacuumed the seams and made a second pass at 120. The final pass, at 220 grit, left the boards smooth enough to catch light without erasing the shallow tool marks. She applied 3 thin coats of tung oil, rubbing each one along the grain and wiping away the excess after 30 minutes. Between coats, the floor cured for 48 hours with the windows cracked despite the cold. The wood shifted from dark honey toward mahogany. On the 3rd morning, Vera woke before dawn and could not make herself enter the workroom. She carried her coat to the marsh instead. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, its long neck folded, 1 foot hidden beneath the water, for nearly an hour. Neither of them moved. Vera did no work that day. The following morning, she returned to the floor, sanded one rough patch by hand, and finished the final coat before noon. There were 8 windows in the loft. 3 had no glass. 4 were cracked from corner to corner. The 8th held a single original pane dated by its wavy surface and narrow muntins to 1788, likely salvaged from an older Nantucket house. Vera left that pane untouched. She removed the damaged sash one at a time, labelling every weight and pulley with pencil marks. Henry sold her 1/4-inch cotton sash cord and showed her how to tie a figure-8 knot large enough to hold inside the counterweight pocket without jamming the channel. For new panes, Vera pressed DAP 33 glazing putty into a thin bedding line, set the glass gently, and fixed it with triangular points spaced no more than 8 inches apart. She rolled the outer putty into narrow ropes, pressed them against the rabbet, then drew a glazing knife across each side in one deliberate stroke. The first corner sagged. She scraped it clean and began again. By the 7th window, her lines were straight enough to shed rain without appearing new. She washed the glass with vinegar water and newspaper, leaving the old pane cloudy so no one would mistake age for neglect. On February 26th, she lifted the final sash into its frame and fed the new cord over the pulley. The counterweight descended smoothly inside the wall. When she raised the window, cold air entered carrying the smell of wet earth from beneath the snow. A chickadee landed on the nearest walnut branch. It tilted its black-capped head toward the open room while Vera tied the last figure-8 knot. Then the bird flew across the marsh, and the window remained balanced wherever she placed it. The walls near the chimney were horsehair plaster laid over hand-split oak lath. Where heat and damp had worked together, the surface had loosened into hollow islands. Vera's first patch fell before it dried. The second cracked along the edge. The third remained attached but bowed outward like a held breath. Henry brought an old burlap bag from his shed. A braid of coarse horsehair rested inside, saved from his father's plastering years. Vera washed it, cut it into finger-length strands, and mixed it through lime plaster until the fibres disappeared beneath the trowel. She pressed a scored scratch coat through the lath and left grooves for the next layer. The brown coat went on 3/8 of an inch thick and cured for 72 hours beneath damp cloth. Last came a 1/8 inch finish coat drawn flat with a steel trowel and softened at the edges with a wet brush. In the evening light, the repaired wall showed 3 slight changes in texture. Vera ran her fingertips across them without sanding away the evidence. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Mather owned the Downy Flake and wore her grey hair in a net even after the ovens had cooled. Twice a week, she left a folded paper bag on Vera's doorstep before sunrise. One held biscuits and an apple. Another contained fish chowder sealed in a glass jar beneath waxed paper. Vera caught her crossing the Shell Lane one morning and tried to offer $2. Doris closed Vera's fingers around the coins. In candles when the shop reopens. She walked away before Vera could explain that there might never be a shop. Caleb Coffin arrived on a blue Schwinn with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, tall at the wrists and ankles, with one front tooth chipped into a clean white angle. Without introducing himself, she began dividing the walnut rounds stacked behind the loft. Vera carried out the ledger. "I can pay by the hour." He set another round upright. "My mother said, about your grandfather." The sentence ended there. Caleb worked until dusk, stacking each split with the bark facing outward. Before leaving, she sharpened the maul on Vera's stone and leaned it beside the door for the following Saturday. Reverend Boyd passed the property every morning at 7:20. He walked with a polished hawthorn cane and wore a black coat whose cuffs had gone green with age. He never entered. He only paused at the shell lane, tipped his hat toward Vera, and said the same four-word prayer. Strength for honest work. On mornings when she had slept badly, Vera listened for his cane striking the road. Vera postponed the cellar until February 11th, when the ground had frozen hard enough that seepage no longer ran beneath the foundation. The entrance lay under a trapdoor behind the stove. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot floor paved in irregular fieldstone. She lowered a lantern ahead of her and tested every tread before placing her weight. At the center rested a dressed granite slab, a smoother and more deliberate than the surrounding stones. A carved mark crossed its surface, 3 masts enclosed by the outline of a bottle. Vera swept dust from the symbol. She did not lift the slab. Under the 3rd step, her fingers found a small oak box wedged between stone and joist. Its lid opened without resistance. Inside lay a brass key whose bow had been shaped into the same bottled ship, along with a tintype wrapped in oilcloth. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the loft in a high-collared white blouse. She held long tweezers in one hand and looked into the camera with Vera's level gaze, the left eyebrow slightly higher than the right. On the back, written in brown ink, were the words, Eliza Rook, daughter of Josiah, age 25, summer of 1903. Vera carried the photograph upstairs and placed it beneath the cobalt bottle. The key remained on the mantel. She did not know what it opened. Snow retreated first from the stone walls, then from the roots of the walnuts. The creek beyond the marsh grew loud with meltwater, and yellow-green catkins loosened above the shell lane. Vera cleaned Elias's tools, sharpened the knife, and copied his measurements into a fresh notebook. She did not begin a full ship that spring. The loft still needed paint, shelves, and a door that would close without lifting. From the cache, she selected 1 worn silver coin. She would spend only that coin on pearwood, line and thread, hide glue, and plain glass bottles. She would practice on small samples until her hands could fail without wasting what could not be replaced. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2026, Vera finished her first complete ship. The bottle had once held medicine. Its glass was clear but imperfect, with 1 long ripple down the shoulder. Inside stood a Nantucket sloop carved from pearwood, its hull darkened with lamp-blackened oil. 3 linen stays held the mast. A scrap of cotton formed the mainsail, not white, but the colour of old paper. Vera had built 4 earlier versions. 1 mast snapped against the neck. 1 hull twisted in the glue. Another stood correctly but carried a sail too large for its scale. The 4th remained on the shelf unfinished, a record of every measurement she had misunderstood. On the 5th, she waited 12 minutes after setting the hull. She drew the forward stay first. The mast rose without touching the glass. She did not cheer. She rested both hands on the bench until they stopped trembling. The restored interior had kept its plainness. The white pine floor held scars beneath the oil. Shelves of cleaned bottles stood against the west wall, arranged by neck width rather than colour. Walter's roofing hatchet hung beside Elias's brass dividers. The old pane from 1788 bent the morning light across the plaster in a wavering line. Above the stove, the brass key waited on its nail. During the first week of January, a storm split a low limb from the oldest walnut tree. Vera cut the branch into stove lengths and found a rectangle of dark metal exposed beneath the torn bark. It was not a marker. It was a key plate. The brass key entered the opening but would not turn until she pressed inward. A narrow section of bark released on a concealed hinge. Inside the hollow rested an oilskin bundle protected by a fitted copper sleeve. Vera carried it to the workbench. The first fold revealed a 48-star American flag. Its blue field faded almost grey. Beneath it lay a letter dated August 21st, 1944, written by Eliza Rook while Samuel's body was being returned from France. She wrote that grief had made the shop unbearable, yet closing it would allow the work to die beside her son. She had placed the flag in the tree because Samuel used to climb that trunk as a boy and watch vessels enter the harbour. The metal plate was to remain hidden until someone reopened the loft by choice rather than obligation. The final lines were brief. Do not make a shrine of this room. Make useful things. Teach one patient person. Keep the door open when you can. Vera folded the letter along its weakening creases and wrapped it again with the flag. She replaced both inside the copper sleeve, but she left the small bark door visible. Hidden things, she had learned, did not always remain safer by being forgotten. On July 19th, the anniversary of Samuel Rook's death near St. Lo, Vera carried his Purple Heart to the Massachusetts National Cemetery in Bourne. A records clerk had found the family plot where his name appeared on a memorial stone, though his remains had been buried overseas. Vera placed the medal beneath the carved date for 1 minute. Then she returned it to the tin. She had used 4 coins from the cache. The first bought practice materials. The second paid for lime and replacement glass. The third purchased a used lathe small enough for the workbench. The fourth became a donation to the maritime collection that had helped confirm Samuel's service record. Everything else remained wrapped and counted. Vera sealed the packets in a new cedar chest lined with green wool. Inside the lid, she wrote the total, the 4 expenditures, and the location of every receipt. Below the ledger, she added 3 words, for the next one. The shop reopened without a sign or announcement. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard between a notice for piano lessons and a photograph of a lost orange cat. Ship miniature repairs. Bottle work by appointment. Milk Street, Shell Lane. The first customer brought a schooner whose foremast had collapsed in 1973. Vera repaired it for the cost of thread. The second mailed a square bottle from Gloucester with a loose paper C. By autumn, more than 40 names filled a mailing list kept in a school notebook beside the stove. Vera accepted only the work she could complete carefully. Some weeks. That meant 1 bottle. Caleb returned in November carrying a long parcel beneath his arm. He had finished school and begun working with a boat carpenter near the harbour. His shoulders now filled the brown coat that had once hung from him. He unwrapped a hand-carved cedar sign. Rook, Maritime Miniatures, and Daughters. Vera read it twice. There were daughters, Caleb said. Eliza. Ruth. You, the name is not mine, neither was the loft. He set the sign against the workbench and reached for the splitting maul, though the woodpile needed no attention. They hung it above the door that afternoon. Caleb had left the carving slightly rough around the final word. Tool marks caught the light inside each letter. Vera did not sand them away. That winter, after completing her 7th ship, she opened a sheet of cream paper and placed Elias's letter beside it. The loft was quiet except for the stove and the small movements of cooling glass. She began, "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote that the roof was sound, the chimney drew cleanly, and the original western pane should never be replaced merely because its surface was uneven. She listed the location of the cedar chest and explained why 4 coins were missing. She recorded the proper angle for lifting a mast through a narrow neck and warned that fresh linen line stretched more than expected. Then she wrote about failure. She described the plaster patches that had fallen, the sail cut too large, the afternoon lost beside the marsh, and the first winter night when she had heard the hidden box shift beneath the velvet. She did not mention Celia, the college board, or the phone call that ended in silence. Those things had brought her to the island, but they had not taught her the work. Near the end, she copied one sentence that had followed her from Elias's harbour bench into the loft, even inside the narrowest space. You can still build a ship pointed toward the open sea. Vera left the letter unsigned. There would be time to add a date when she knew the next hands were near. At dusk she lowered the finished sloop into its padded box, swept pearwood curls from the bench, and turned the front sign inward against the weather. The walnut branches moved above the repaired roof. Beyond them, the winter water opened toward the sound. The ship-in-a-bottle builder's loft waits. It has always waited. In the county office, Mrs. Dorothea Pike retired the following spring. Her replacement emptied the walnut desk one drawer at a time, finding paper clips, sealing wax, 2 cough drops hardened inside their wrappers, and a single worn dollar marked with a blue line. Mrs. Pike took everything else home. The dollar remained in the drawer beneath the brass stamp, folded into quarters, while new deeds passed over it and the county seal came down.